Emily leaned back in her seat, propping her feet up on the dashboard. I shot her a nervous glance and tightened my grip on the wheel. "That's not exactly safe," I muttered under my breath. She rolled her eyes at me. "I trust you," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You don't have to micromanage every little thing I do." I bit down on my frustration and kept my focus on the road. The last thing I wanted was to kick off another argument. Not this weekend. This was supposed to be about fixing us, not adding to the pile of things pulling us apart. We hadn't even made it to the cabin yet, and all I could think was if we couldn't survive 3 days alone together, how are we supposed to keep this whole marriage thing afloat? Luckily, we made it to the cabin without her knees ending up through the windshield in some freak accident. She actually seemed in a good mood as we stepped out of the car. I unlocked the front door and walked in, taking in the cozy little cabin. Emily's face lit up, and for a moment, I was reminded why I fell for her in the first place. That spark of joy made me ache. It had been so long since I'd been the one to put that look on her face. I could only hope this weekend might change that. "So, what do you want to do first?" I asked, setting the grocery bags down on the kitchen island. But she wasn't listening. She was already down the hallway, her voice echoing back to me. "This place is adorable." I grabbed our suitcase and followed her voice to the bedroom. She was kneeling in front of the TV, flipping through a stack of DVDs. "They've got a bunch of movies, but I don't feel like watching any of them," she said, a little deflated. "We didn't drive all the way out here to watch movies," I reminded her. She stood up and wandered into a small nook tucked in the corner. A tiny writing desk sat there with a basket full of notebooks and travel guides on it. "I just wanted to look around," she said, brushing her fingers over the basket. "Although, maybe watching a scary movie in a cabin in the woods could be fun." I ran a hand through my hair and sighed. Somehow, even casual conversations had turned into minefields lately. "What's in the basket?" I asked, steering the conversation elsewhere. She picked up a notebook and opened it. "Looks like notes from people who've stayed here. Oh, look. These folks even left a picture of their dogs." She held the book up in front of me, showing off a photo of 2 huskies. "Nice," I said, trying to sound interested. "Maybe we'll write something sweet in here, too," she said softly, flipping through the pages. Sensing the mood start to slip, I jumped in quickly. "Why don't we take a look around outside while there's still some daylight? It's barely drizzling, and I bet we can find some cool rocks by the river." Her face lit up again, and she was already moving. She brushed past me, heading for the back deck. I followed before she got too far and caught her hand as she stepped outside. She glanced back at me, her smile warm and genuine. "I'm glad we came," I told her. Her fingers squeezed mine gently in response. We followed the trail through the trees, the soft crunch of wet leaves underfoot. It wasn't far to the river, and soon we reached the rocky bank. Emily let go of my hand and jogged ahead, stopping just at the water's edge. "I love it here," she said, her voice quiet as she glanced over her shoulder at me. Her rain-dampened hair clung to her face, and for a moment, it was like seeing her for the first time all over again. All the arguments, the distance, the years of strain, they just faded away. I stepped closer and pulled her into my arms. She started to protest but quickly gave in, resting against my chest. Her arms circled around me, and she laid her head on my shoulder. We stood there for a while, surrounded by the sounds of the river and the forest, and for the first time in forever, I felt hopeful. Maybe we could make this work after all. "What's that?" she asked suddenly, breaking away and walking toward the trees. I followed her, squinting into the woods but seeing nothing unusual. She crouched down, brushing aside the damp leaves of a fern. Beneath it was a small leather-bound book. "How on earth did you spot that from the river?" I asked, bewildered. She glanced up at me, her tone defensive. "I don't know, I just did." She reached for the book and wrinkled her nose. "It's wet. It's been raining all week. I'm surprised it's not falling apart." "Maybe it hasn't been out here very long," she mused. "Let's take it inside and see what it says." I opened my mouth to argue, wanting to hold on to the connection we'd just shared, but one look at her expression told me it was pointless. Once Emily set her mind to something, there was no stopping her. We kicked off our muddy shoes at the door, and Emily settled on the sofa with the book in her lap. I turned on the electric fireplace and grabbed a fluffy towel from the bathroom. Drying her hair seemed like a good excuse to get close to her again, maybe even spark something more. When I walked back into the room, she was still sitting with her feet tucked under her, completely absorbed in the book. I cleared my throat and held the towel out to her, smiling. She looked up absent-mindedly and took the towel from my hands. "Thanks," she muttered, placing it on the back of the sofa without even using it. My hopes for intimacy vanished in an instant. "This is weird," she murmured, more to herself than to me. "This book doesn't make any sense." She turned it toward me, flipping through the pages before I could say a word. The paper looked old and worn, with burnt edges and reddish-brown stains. Every page was covered in strange symbols I'd never seen before, mixed with grotesque drawings of flayed bodies and horned creatures. I frowned. It's just some artsy project, or someone's idea of a joke. "Come on, let's put it down and spend some time together." Before I could finish, she pulled the book back toward her and waved a hand to silence me. "I want to keep looking at it. I like it." I rolled my eyes. "You like it? It's gross, Emily. And you can't even read any of it. Just put it down and let me dry your hair." "I said no, Chris," she snapped, glaring at me. "And I can read some of it. The last page here is in English. Look." She shoved the book toward me again, but I stepped back, frustration boiling over. "I don't care, Emily. We didn't come here for this. We came to fix things, not to obsess over some creepy old book." She ignored me, her eyes scanning the page. Then she began to read aloud. "When darkness overtakes the day, that's when GooGoo likes to play da. Teeth so sharp, eyes so red, if you see him, you're good as dead." Here's the reworked version of this part of the story. "Yeah, that's real spooky," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "I'm going to make dinner. Feel free to join me if you can tear yourself away from your little horror show." "I don't think it's a ghost," Emily muttered, more to herself than to me. GooGoo seems like something else. I just wish I could figure out the rest of this." To her credit, she did put the book down when dinner was ready. She even joined the conversation with more than her usual one-word answers, and after we ate, she helped clear the table. For the first time, I thought maybe the weekend wasn't completely off the rails. After dinner, we headed to the bedroom. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, running a brush through her damp hair while I scrolled on my phone, trying to think of a way to bring back the mood we'd had earlier. Suddenly, she froze mid-stroke, tilting her head like she was straining to hear something. "Do you hear that?" she asked. "What is that noise?" I set my phone down and listened. "All I hear is the rain," I said after a moment. She frowned and got up, walking to the window above the little writing desk. "No, it's not rain," she insisted. "It's licking, or slurping, and sometimes there's a crunching sound. Do you hear it?" I sighed, walking over to her. Wrapping my arms around her from behind, I pulled her close. "It's rain, Emily. You're just not used to hearing it in the trees. That book's got you all wound up." I brushed her hair back and cupped her cheek. "Come on, let's lie down. Maybe we can watch a movie or something." Her big brown eyes stayed on mine, worry etched on her face. I silently prayed she'd let it go. To my relief, she smiled faintly and turned toward the movie shelf, pulling one off and holding it up like a prize. "You really want to watch a movie about people getting lost in haunted woods right now?" I teased, laughing. "It's atmospheric," she said with a grin, sliding the disc into the player. I started to protest, but when she snuggled up next to me, resting her head on my chest, I figured I could deal with it. Together, we watched college kids make bad choices until the credits rolled. When the movie ended, the cabin felt quieter than ever. Emily stiffened beside me. "I still hear it," she whispered. I kissed her hair, hoping to calm her nerves. "It's just the rain," I said softly. "Come on, let's get some sleep." She slipped out of my arms and walked back to the window. She stared out for a moment, then gasped. "There's something, standing by the river," she said, her voice barely audible. With a sigh, I joined her by the window. I peered out, but all I saw were shadows and the faint shimmer of moonlight on water. "I don't see anything," I said, rubbing her arms gently. Let's go back to bed. You're imagining things. No, look, she insisted, pointing. It's like a man, but with horns and wings. I pulled the curtains closed and turned her to face me. Emily, you're letting that creepy book get into your head. Let's just go to bed. I promise. I'll take your mind off it. She hesitated, her eyes darting around like she was still searching for whatever she thought she'd seen. Finally, she bit her lip, considering. Okay, she agreed reluctantly, but give me a minute. I want to write this in the guest book, just in case someone else hears it. I don't want them to think they're crazy. I threw my hands up. Fine, 5 minutes. Then I want you in bed. She smiled, a playful glint in her eyes, and nodded. After scribbling something in the guest book, she climbed into bed and delivered on her promise. For the first time in what felt like forever, I thought maybe things were going to be okay. Outside, the rain kept falling. As I drifted off with Emily nestled against me, I couldn't shake the feeling that it really did sound a little bit like licking. The next morning, I woke up feeling unusually rested. The bed had been more comfortable than I expected, and I'd slept like a log. Emily wasn't next to me, but the curtains were open, and the bedroom door was ajar. Stretching lazily, I shuffled into the living area to find her. She was sitting on the sofa, hugging her knees to her chest, staring vacantly out the window toward the river. I leaned down and kissed the top of her head. Morning, Em. Did you make coffee? She didn't respond, her gaze fixed on the water outside. Suppressing a sigh, I walked into the kitchen. Whatever progress we'd made the night before seemed to have evaporated overnight, and I wasn't caffeinated enough to deal with it. I started a pot of coffee and slid a couple of English muffins into the toaster. Turning back toward the counter, I jumped, nearly dropping the mug in my hand. Emily was standing silently in the doorway, her eyes fixed on me with an unnervingly blank expression. I took a deep breath to steady myself. I didn't hear you come in. You startled. Why did you open all the curtains? She interrupted, her tone sharp and accusing. I blinked. What? The curtains, Chris, she repeated impatiently. They were all closed when we went to bed. Why did you open them? I just got up, I said, frowning. You were up before me. Are you sure they were closed? Yes, Chris, she snapped, her voice rising. You closed the one in the bedroom yourself. When I woke up, they were open. I rubbed the bridge of my nose, willing the coffee to finish brewing faster. Emily, I didn't open them, she cried, her voice cracking. Tears welled up in her eyes. Please just tell me why you opened them. Why? Setting the mug down, I moved toward her and wrapped her in my arms. She began to sob against my chest. Hey, it's okay, I murmured. You're okay. Maybe you were sleepwalking again? I know it's been years, but being somewhere unfamiliar might have. She shook her head violently. No, she said, her voice muffled against me. I saw him. I froze, then gently pushed her back to look into her face. Saw who? I saw him, she said, her eyes wild and glistening with tears. In the bedroom. He was watching me. I felt frustration creeping in but forced myself to stay calm. Emily, no one else is here. Who are you talking about? Her gaze sharpened, full of conviction. A huge figure with horns and wings, she said. He was standing in the nook by the desk, watching me all night. He knows I read his book. It sounds like you had a nightmare, I said, keeping my tone gentle, which would explain the curtains. It wasn't a dream, she shouted, stepping back from me. He was here. He knows. He's watching me. Who? Emily? Who even knows where we are? I asked, exasperated. Oh, GooGoo, she screamed, her voice raw. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing hysterically. A familiar surge of anger flared inside me. It was as though years of progress had unraveled in an instant. Clenching my fists, I turned on my heel and marched into the living room. The book sat open on the coffee table, its worn pages covered in strange symbols and grotesque illustrations. The reddish stains that marked it looked disturbingly like blood, but I reminded myself they were probably just ink. Whatever it was, I wasn't going to let it keep ruining our weekend. I reached for the book, intending to throw it away, but before my hand could touch it, Emily's slender fingers clamped around my wrist. "Don't you dare," she hissed. I stared at her, startled. "Where did you even come from? How did you get here so fast?" "The book stays with me," she said firmly, her voice unnervingly calm. "Emily." She smiled, a strained, unsettling smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's fine. I'm fine. Please don't take the book from me. I like it." I pulled my hand back, watching as she visibly relaxed. The toaster popped in the kitchen, and the coffee machine let out a final sputter. "I don't know what to do," I admitted softly. "I'm worried about you." "I'm fine," she said again, her smile faltering. "I just didn't sleep well. You were right. It must have been a dream. I'll be happy for the rest of the weekend, okay? I promise." She placed her hands on my shoulders and kissed me lightly, her attempt to reassure me only heightening my unease. "Are you sure you're okay?" I asked again, hesitating. Her smile grew a touch more sincere, though it still didn't reach her eyes. "Trust me, I've never been better." With that, she picked up the book, holding it tightly to her chest like a lifeline, and walked down the hall to the bedroom, shutting the door behind her. I exhaled heavily, running a hand through my hair, before heading back to the kitchen for my coffee and muffin. Last night had felt like a turning point, but now it was clear. Any hope of salvaging the weekend was slipping away. A couple of hours later, things seemed to take a turn for the better when she came out of the bedroom, wearing a little red bikini and that mischievous grin of hers. I thought about bringing up how strange she'd been earlier that morning, but then she pulled my swimming trunks from behind her back and dangled them in front of me. I decided it was better to keep quiet, slipped into the trunks, and joined her in the hot tub on the back deck. It was still raining, but the deck was covered, and even though the air was chilly, the hot tub was nice and warm. We turned on the jets and sat there, just looking out at the woods and the river, enjoying the quiet. I started to forget about her odd behavior and that ridiculous book, and remembered why we were really here. "I love you. You know that, right?" I said after a while, glancing down at her as she snuggled against me. She smiled, but kept her gaze on the river. "Of course. And I haven't given up on us. I think we—" Suddenly, she sat up straight, nearly elbowing me in the chest. "Did you see that?" My heart sank. Why did it feel like I was always spinning my wheels with her? I didn't see anything. "Emily, I'm trying to talk to you about our—" She stood up so fast that water splashed over the edge of the tub. Goosebumps covered her skin as the cool air hit her. "Shut up. There's something running through the trees." She was pulling away from me, both physically and emotionally. I reached out, grabbed her hand, and tried to pull her back. "It's probably just a bird or a deer or something. Come on, sit down. Let's talk." "I'm scared, Chris. It's getting closer. Let's go inside," she said, almost absent-mindedly, pulling away again and climbing out of the tub. She slammed the glass door behind her before I could say anything. I sighed and followed her inside. Once we were inside, Emily's mood seemed to lift a bit, and she let me dry her off with one of the big towels from the bathroom. But every time I tried to bring the conversation back to us, she shut me down again. So, I finally gave up and decided to just enjoy the evening. We played a few board games, and I cooked dinner for her. But once the sun set, things started to take a turn again. "Do you hear that?" she said, looking up from the game board. I sighed. Things had been going better. "It's just the rain." "No, not that," she insisted. "I mean, yeah, the licking noise is back, but listen, there's something else." I closed my eyes and listened for a moment, then opened them again, looking at her. "What am I supposed to be hearing now?" She stood up and walked toward the back door. "It sounds like chanting. Don't you hear it?" I followed her and wrapped my arms around her from behind. "Yeah? What are they saying?" "Let me guess. They're calling out for GooGoo?" She turned and glared at me. "I don't appreciate you making fun of me, Chris. Do you hear anything or not? It sounds like a different language." I listened again and thought I could hear faint music coming from somewhere far off. "It's probably just someone's stereo from another cabin." "No, it's not. This isn't music. And look, do you see those red lights out there in the woods?" I glanced over, but saw nothing, just as I had expected. I reached around her and pulled the curtains across the door, then leaned in and kissed her neck softly. "Let's go to bed," I murmured. She pushed me away. "You don't believe me. Something strange is going on here, and you don't even care." I sighed, frustrated. "Of course I care. I care about you. I just want you to feel safe and happy." She spun around, her eyes wide with panic. "Then listen, there's something out there, and it's watching me." I closed the curtains on the living room window and gently guided her down the hall toward the bedroom. "I won't let anything happen to us, okay? I'll take care of you. Tomorrow morning, we'll go home, and everything will be fine. Do you trust me?" She sat at the desk and stared out at the woods for a moment before closing the curtains and picking up the guest book, seemingly planning to write yet another warning for the next people who stayed here. "Yeah," she said quietly, but I could tell it wasn't convincing. "I trust you." Later that night, I woke up to find the bed empty. The room was lit only by dim moonlight, blocked by clouds and the constant rain. Emily had opened the curtains again, even though we'd shut them before bed at her insistence. I strained to see through the eerie light, but my wife was nowhere in sight. "Emily?" I called out as I got out of bed. Normally, I'd assume she was in the bathroom, but with the way she'd been acting all weekend, I had a sinking feeling I needed to find her. I walked into the living room. It was empty, but the door to the back deck was wide open. I grabbed my jacket and hurried outside, panic starting to rise in my chest. I called out for her again. Then, in a flash of lightning, I saw her. She was standing by the river, facing away from me. Her wet hair hung down her bare back, and it hit me. She was naked. The rain was pouring down, and it had to be near 40 degrees outside. What was she doing? I approached slowly, calling her name every few moments, but either she couldn't hear me over the rain and the rushing water, or she was ignoring me. When I finally reached her, I saw that she was covered in something dark, slick, and sticky. I reached out and touched her shoulder. Emily spun around so quickly I almost lost my balance. She was covered in the same dark goo, and her face was blank. She was naked, except for a strange necklace I'd never seen before. A small bottle with a winged creature etched on it. I reached out to get a better look, but when I touched the necklace, she snarled at me in a way that wasn't human and pulled back. "Emily," I said softly, reaching out again, careful to avoid the necklace. "Come on, let's go inside." She wouldn't move. I begged, pulled, and pleaded, but she stayed still, staring at me with vacant eyes. After what felt like forever, I decided I had to carry her inside. But when I wrapped my arms around her, I realized she wasn't looking at me anymore. She was staring at something behind me. A chill ran down my spine. I didn't want to turn around. I knew my wife was losing it, but what if, for some crazy reason, she wasn't? What if there was something out there? But we couldn't stand out in the rain forever. Emily was having some kind of breakdown, and I needed to get her back to the city for help. "Oh, GooGoo," she whispered, her voice soft but strangely warm. Then I heard a low growl from the trees behind me. That was it. I turned and ran toward the cabin, leaving my wife at the river's edge. It wasn't my proudest moment, but when survival kicks in, there's no time for hesitation. I figured I could figure out a way to get her back inside once I was safe. I ran up the rocky shore and headed toward the woods, my heart pounding. In my panic, I barely noticed the figure standing just outside the tree line. But those glowing red eyes were impossible to miss. I pushed through the trees, following the muddy path as best I could, slipping and stumbling. I finally made it to the deck. I rushed inside, and as I locked the door behind me, I saw what my wife had been so terrified of all weekend. The thing I had refused to believe was real. He was nearly 7 feet tall and had a strange, almost human shape, but his long, pointed horns and massive, leathery wings made it clear he wasn't anything normal. His torso and thighs were covered in grayish fur, and his arms and legs ended in long, sharp claws. The same dark, slick liquid that had been on my wife was dripping from his mouth, and his eyes, those glowing red eyes, were full of menace. The stupid rhyme from that book my wife had found echoed in my mind. When darkness overtakes the day, that's when GooGoo likes to play teeth so sharp. Eyes so red, if you see him, you're good as dead. I didn't waste another second. I grabbed my keys off the table and ran straight for the door. Screw my wife. She could stay out there with whatever that gargoyle demon was for all I cared. I wasn't about to stick around and let it eat my soul. I jumped in the car and hit the gas, tearing out of the driveway like a bat out of hell. But as it turned out, a more literal bat out of hell was right behind me. The glowing red eyes appeared in my rearview mirror almost instantly. I floored the accelerator, skidding dangerously on the wet dirt road as my windshield wipers struggled to keep up with the downpour. There were a few narrow, wooden bridges between me and the highway, and I wasn't sure they'd hold up, but there was no way I was stopping now. The creature was gaining on me. When I hit the first bridge, I pushed the pedal down even harder, flying past the 5 miles per hour sign and hoping to stay on track. I lost my side mirror to the railing as I went through, but I didn't care. I made it across, my heart pounding with adrenaline. The second bridge was going to be a problem. It was longer, narrower, and crossed the entire Skycomish River, barely wide enough for the car. I knew I couldn't afford to mess up. My heartbeat was loud in my ears as I approached, but I didn't slow down. As soon as my tires hit the bridge, my headlights flickered out. Panic gripped me as I scrambled to flip switches and press buttons, but nothing worked. The bridge stretched out in front of me, and I couldn't see a thing. I glanced in the rear view again, and to my surprise, the red eyes were gone. Without the immediate threat behind me, I let my foot off the gas a little and slowed down. I had no idea where I was, but I assumed I was halfway across the bridge. Then, out of nowhere, the car jolted as something heavy landed on the roof. I screamed before I could stop myself, but I managed to keep the wheel steady. I slammed the gas pedal again, praying the whole time. The headlights flickered back on, lighting up the bridge ahead. At the far end stood GooGoo, glaring straight at me. He was only a few yards away, and I was approaching fast. Without thinking, I jerked the wheel hard to the right. That's all it took. The car launched off the wooden railing, headed straight for the river below. Time slowed down as I flew through the air. I thought about my wife, about all the things she had been saying, begging me to believe her all weekend. If I just listened, would things be different now? I could almost laugh at the sudden clarity that hit me. Where was that realization before we let our marriage fall apart? The river was coming up fast now, and I braced myself for impact. The image of my wife's feet on the dashboard, her voice saying, "I trust you," echoed in my head. If only I had trusted her in return. The car hit the water with a violent crash. The river was swollen and moving fast from all the rain. The current took the car almost instantly, and there was nothing I could do. As the cabin filled with water, I looked up into the murky darkness, just in time to see two faint red eyes slowly moving toward me.